Developing a healthy personality. This is one of the most important things we do in life, because a healthy personality is the foundation of happiness. And the ultimate aim of all of human life is to be happy. In fact, what I learned from Ayn Rand when I began reading her was several things, but one of the things she said is that you can measure the quality of your entire life by how happy you are most of the time. If you can achieve your own happiness, as I said before, then you're a very successful person, even if you live in a small house or a small shack. But if you can accomplish everything but you're not happy, then to that degree you really have not lived a successful life. So how do we develop a healthy personality? 85% of our happiness in life comes from happy relationships with other people. 85% of our happiness comes with hair on top. In most cases. There are some exceptions here, but the other 15% comes from achievement of some kind. And so the achievement is kind of like the icing on the cake. The achievement is really helpful, but you'll never get any lasting joy from achievement. There are people who are billionaires who are miserable, who worked their way up from farm boys, and they're billionaires today, and they're still unhappy. They've got massive homes and cars and yachts and boats and everything else, and they're miserable, and they're snappy, and they're irritable, and they've got physical ailments, and they have doctors that travel with them to administer to them, and so on. And there are people who, have done far less than that, are just happy all the time, and that's your goal. And remember, someone said, what was that wonderful line? He said, you better be very clear about what you're aiming at, because that's probably what you're going to hit. And if you're aiming at happiness, then make sure that happiness is the organizing principle. And of course, the core of happiness is peace of mind. Core of happiness is peace of mind. So we say the measures of a healthy personality are, number one, is how much you like yourself. Really, that's the core, your level of self-esteem, how much you genuinely like and respect yourself and consider yourself to be a good person. And the wonderful thing is, as we said at the beginning, you are a thoroughly good person. And what you do is just make sure that everything you do on the outside is consistent with that truth, is that you're a thoroughly good person. There was a little book that was written in the turn of the last century, and it was called What Would Jesus Do? And it was a little book written by a minister, became a national bestseller many years ago, but it was about a town, just a normal town, normal citizens with all their problems and complaints and difficulties. And the preacher gave a speech, and he said, let us all live in this town, and before we do or say anything, just ask, what would Jesus do in this situation? And so the story, it was a fictional story, talked about how everybody in this town began to use that as their basic principle in business, in relationships, in law, in work, in interacting with other people. They would always ask that question, and the town became an absolutely happy place where people were full of joy and treated each other with warmth and compassion and helped each other and so on. Just a really nice concept. In other words, they said, if the highest aspiration is to be a totally beautiful person, then use that as your guiding principle. How would a really fully fulfilled person behave in every situation? But it's a real tough standard, by the way. Oh, geez. I don't do that, Okay, number two is how much responsibility do you accept? How much responsibility you accept. And remember, there's a spectrum from accepting total responsibility, which means total power, total confidence, and irresponsibility, not accepting any responsibility at all, which is total anger, total frustration, and total failure in life. You cannot imagine a leader who does not accept responsibility. And you cannot imagine an irresponsible person ever becoming a leader. And so the key words are, I am responsible. No matter what happens, I am responsible. When I was a child, my parents were responsible. Now I'm a grown-up, I'm responsible. The third is how easily you forgive. And this is a real toughie, but it's really the essence of spiritual development. I say it's the key to the spiritual kingdom is to develop the ability to freely forgive, so that there's nobody in your life that you have any anger toward. You have no negative emotion toward anybody. You forgive them all. Let them go. Forgive them all. God bless them. Let them go. God bless them. Let them go. I used to be angry with my parents, and then I realized that my parents were the product of their parents, who were the product of their parents, going back generations. And that what my father was, especially, was nothing. He could be none other. And it's just like a tree. You don't get mad at a tree. You don't get mad at a stick. You don't get mad at a person who could be no other than who they are. That's why it's important to understand that no matter how your parents treated you, it had nothing to do with you. It had to do with them. It was their problems, and you just happened to be a drive-by shooting victim. You just happened to get the brunt of their own problems, which they brought with them from generations back, and you could never have changed it. You could not have gotten your parents to deal with you differently than they did. They could not have given you any more love than they gave you or any more attention, because that's just the way they were. So just let it go. I was out with a girl many years ago, and I was complaining about my father. Bitch, 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 my father is my father. She said, Brian, she said, are you happy to be alive? And I said, yes. Well, yes, of course. Yes, I'm really happy with my life. He said, well, he got you here, so shut up. I wanted some sympathy. I wanted some, pat my brow sort of stuff. And she was no nonsense. She said, just shut up. If you're happy to be alive, then shut up. Your parents got you here. You know something? I never complained about my father or my parents ever again for the rest of my life, from that day to this. I said, well, at least they got me here. They gave me a kick at the cat. They gave me a chance at life. So no more complaints. From Scott Peck. Not Scott Peck, but there's a philosopher. The young man comes to the philosopher and he says, life is hard. And the philosopher said, as compared with what? And always think about, life is hard? As compared with what? Your current situation is hard? As compared with what? Being dead? Think about that. If you know the old saying, I cried because I had no shoes and then I met a man who had no feet. If you think of the fact that you're probably better off than 95% of the world's population in history, then you think that your problems are very small and theirs are very big. There's a little one-liner I read. I was sitting in a waiting room and there's a quote book, and I read the quote and I never forgot it. I put the book down and never saw it again. It said, if all the people in the world could bring all of their cares and put them into a great big pile where they could see them in comparison with everybody else's cares, he said each person would slink ashamedly forward and take their little care of the pile and slink away quietly into the night. Something like that. I thought, isn't that interesting? If you could compare your problems with the problems that other people really have, you take your little petty problems and you just slink away ashamed into the night. And it's a good way to realize it. No matter what problems you have, other people have got it 100 times worse. Number 4, positive expectations is a mark of a healthy personality. That means that you just have an attitude of confident expectancy. You just positively expect good things to happen. And wonderfully enough, your expectations do become your realities. They become your self-fulfilling prophecies. So if you expect good things to happen, good things are going to happen to you. If you expect to have a happy life and have a wonderful relationship and get a good table in the restaurant and make a lot of money, those things will happen to you. That expectancy is almost like a wave of energy that affects everybody around you. And number 5 is how well you get along with others, which is the focal point of this session. How well you get along with others is the measure of how healthy your personality really is. So we say that the law of indirect effort says that in our relationships with others, we seem to get what we want faster, more indirectly than directly. In other words, instead of getting people to like us, we instead like other people. So this law of indirect effort is a powerful, powerful method for getting along wonderfully with other people. I wrote a book a couple of years ago with Ron Arden called The Power of Charm. It's the only book ever written on charm. It's a worldwide top seller. And what it shows you in 35 lessons, 35 just short lessons, how to be charming. And it's quite amazing. And I had a chapter called Charming Him, Charming Her, Charming Others. And Charming Her, I kind of expanded on ways of charming her. And my editors, were all women, came back and said, this sounds very much like a seduction guide. I said, oh no, it's just being friends. It's just being friends with members of the opposite sex. It sounds like you've got something more nefarious that you're thinking about here. And so they maybe cut out all the good parts from charming her, because I don't know where they got that terrible idea. Anyway, so they're just really ideas on charming, and they are ways to be perceived as charming by the way you treat other people. And it's the most amazing darn thing. It's just by treating other people in a special way, they find you to be charming. And one of the very best ways is to ask people really good questions about themselves and listen closely to the answers and be fascinated by the answers. So we say this, we say to impress others, be impressed by them. So if you ask a person, what sort of work do you do? And they say, I do this. You say, wow, that's an interesting field. How long have you been in that field? Geez, how did you get into that? Boy, that's amazing. I've been reading about that field for years. That takes an awful lot of hard work to be successful. I mean, just be impressed by a person's work or their occupation. I'm always sensitive. John, John, are you here? Is John Asseroff here? Yeah. John is here now, but we're just talking at the break about how I'm not really big into self-disclosure. And so I don't like it when people come up to me and ask me personal questions about my inner thoughts and inner feelings, because I don't really feel that it's really of any concern to them. I have more harsh ways of putting it. It's none of their blankety blank business. But I don't feel comfortable with that. So in being charming, you don't ask people intimate questions because you don't know them. You have no right to, but you could ask them what they do and how they like it and how's everything going and how do they get into that field and what are the big challenges in that field today and where do they see the field going in 3 to 5 years. People love to talk about what they do during the day, and the more you listen intensely to people, the more they find you to be charming. They say, geez, that's an interesting person. So, and whenever somebody tells you something about themselves, be impressed by it. Because the more you are impressed by something that the other person does or says, the more they'll be impressed with you without even asking. To be interesting to others, be interested in them. Be interested in them. Many people think that the way to get people to like me is to go out there and try to impress them and try to get them interested. No, be interested in them, and by the law of indirect effort, which is not a theory or a principle of indirect effort, it's a law. And when you indirectly are influenced or impressed or interested in other people, they will automatically find you to be an interesting person. To have a friend, be a friend. To have a friend, be a friend. You can make all the friends you want by going out and finding ways to be friends to other people. How do you become a friend to other people? Find ways to help them. Is there any way I can help you? I will never forget, I was in a meeting with my boss who was worth $800 million, and these people circulate at the same level, and a gentleman from Eastern Canada, his name was McCain, just not like our presidential contender. His name was McCain. He was in charge of McCain Foods, which is one of the biggest companies in Canada. It's $1 billion company, and I read stories about it in the business press. He built it up from a small mom-and-pop shack and small food distributor. Now it's a massive company. So here's this guy. He's a billionaire with my boss, who's an 800 millionaire, and they're talking. And my boss invited me in, and he had a personal assistant, Mr. McCain did, and I was Dr. Allard's personal assistant. So we sat there listening to the two talk, like two giants talking. And they were just very friendly, and they're very courteous and very respectful and talking back and forth, and kind of, as business people are always looking for ways to how we could do business together and so on. And occasionally Dr. Allard would ask me a question or ask the assistant a question to keep us in the conversation. And Mr. McCain would ask me a question and ask his assistant. And I remember at the end of this conversation, which took an hour, and you really realize you're in the presence of real heavyweights. And he turned to me and he said, Brian, he says, is there anything I can do for you? Is there any way I can help you in any way? And I still remember that. He's one of the most powerful men in the country, one of the richest, and he genuinely meant it. He said, I said, you know, I cannot think of anything, but thank you very much for offering. I just really appreciate it. And I still, as you can see, I still remember to this day, it was more than 30 years ago, here's a great man whose whole focus is, how can I help you in some way? And you'll find that's one of the wonderful ways to get along with other people, is to ask them, is there any way I can help you in what you're doing? And what will happen because of the law of reciprocity, what goes around comes around, that person will be open to helping you at a later time if you offer to help them. So the rule is always help others first. Do unto others, but do it first. If you're going to want somebody to do something nice for you, find a way to do it to them first. So, the law of sowing and reaping is another powerful principle in healthy personality. The quality of your relationships at any given moment is the result of what you have sown in those relationships. And remember, we'll talk about this in a minute, but I cannot emphasize it. The way that you grow the value of a relationship is by investing more time in that relationship. There's no other way to do it than by putting more of your own self into the relationship. We say the key to a great relationship is how much time you spend head to head, knee to knee, face to face, heart to heart. That's the key. So the quality of your relationships will largely be determined by the amount of time that you've invested in those relationships in the past. At any given time, by the way, you can dramatically enhance the quality of your relationship by just investing more time in that relationship.